Today we're going to talk about open loops, closed loops, and chains. So first of all, what do I mean by an open loop, a closed loop, and a chain? Let's start with an open loop. So when we think about an open loop, we think about something that has not been completed. For example, my ring is a closed loop, right? But if it hadn't been completed, it would be open. It would be partially open. There would be something that hadn't been completed. A great example of this is on our phones. If, for example, we get notifications, see right there, I have a notification that I'm ready for a system update. That little red dot is what is an open loop in my brain. Or an email notification. Seeing that little red one, that is an open loop. It tells me there's something that needs to be taken care of. Our brains really like to obsess on open loops. And so this can be very powerful if we use it correctly. So if that's an open loop, a closed loop is something that's been completed. We've completed the task and we're ready to move on to something else. So I like to think about open loops and closed loops working together to form what I call a chain. So we would have an open loop that's, say for example, I need to respond to this email. So I would click on the email. I would read through the email and then I would respond immediately. That would create a closed loop, but maybe there was something in that email that I needed to do afterwards. Maybe I needed to add something to my calendar. So that turns into another open loop. I put that on my calendar and I know that coming up in a few days, I have another task to accomplish. That closed loop leads me to a new open loop and to a next step. So this is what I mean by a chain. So open loop, closed loop, chain. So let's talk about in depth why this might be helpful, where we might use this, especially when we're talking about videos. And if we're thinking about ourselves and applying this within our lives. So an open loop would be very helpful to have things that we need to accomplish, tasks that we know we need to complete and that are weighing on our mind. So I like to think about an open loop as a tab on my phone. So if I look and I have all these different applications that are open, I have all of these as open loops. They're things that maybe I need to complete. Maybe I need to check my messages. But once I do, I can say, okay, that's done. I can close that tab, swipe it up, and it's completely closed off. So when we think about that, we think about just like a phone or like our computer, when we have lots of tabs, or maybe you've been on the internet and you've been browsing and suddenly your internet browser starts running really slow. It slows down because all of those open tabs are open loops. They are still connecting to the servers, connecting to all those different areas. And so it's going to take more of the bandwidth of the internet and more of the bandwidth of your computer to accomplish all those different tasks. It's going to keep going back and checking. It's going to keep going and saying, oh, is there an update? Is there an update? Is there an update? That is what we think of as an open loop. Our brains work the same way. When we have lots of things that we need to accomplish, lots of tasks that we need to complete, those are open loops. And once we finish those tasks, we close those off. Just like with my phone, I can say, look, I have all my tabs closed on my internet browser. Closed loop. I've finished my Duolingo. Closed loop. Oh, I still have an email that I haven't read. Open loop. News. I'm done with that. Closed loop. Closed loop. Closed loop. Closed loop. I can keep closing these loops and making sure that I've accomplished the things that I want to have done. And that calms my brain down and makes it so that I am more ready to focus, to concentrate on something. Now, when is it helpful to build open loops? So this is, for example, I did this today. So I like to use Monday Hour One. This is a program that I worked with the Life Coach School. I helped them make a bunch of videos called Monday Hour One. And one of the things that it has you do at the very beginning is you brainstorm all the different ideas. So remember, when we're brainstorming ideas, we are not trying to get closed loops. We're trying to get as many open loops as possible because that creates creativity. It sparks creation. It sparks excitement. It sparks ideas. And so when we brainstorm, we want to build off of this. So we want to have as many open loops as possible. And then we want to close those down at some point and start putting those tasks on our calendar. So I did this earlier today when I was doing my Monday Hour 1. I listed everything that I was going to need to accomplish this week, and I made all these open loops. When I do this, my brain's going to go through and say, wait a second, what about this? What about that? I should really start that podcast. Do you know how you've been thinking about writing a book? You should be writing that now. Oh, you should follow up with that client and that client. Remember you have that project in March? Remember you need to buy tickets for this and buy tickets for that. My brain likes to go through all of these things and have all these open loops. And then I say, okay, now what am I going to work on this week? What am I going to work on today? What am I going to work on right now? And I close all the other loops and focus on what I'm trying to accomplish right now. Right now, I've closed all my other browsers. I've closed all my other tabs. I am recording a video for you. That's all I'm concentrating on. So how is this powerful within our videos? So we want to do the same thing with our videos. So if you remember my storytelling modules, I talk about creating tension. This is what we're doing with open and closed loops. So if you've watched my videos about storytelling, I talk about open and closed loops in a way of tension and execution. So for example, if you think about this car, this little rubber band car, right? It's got this rubber band that I tighten, and that becomes the tension. That is my open loops. I create lots of open loops, and then I close them off to move forward with the tension. So as I'm telling a story, I will lead to something that is an open loop. I will allude to something that is going to come up later. You see this all the time in television, in news. For example, when I worked in news, we would always talk about teasing. So what we would do is we would tease the stories that were coming up next. So coming up in 30 minutes, we're going to talk about fill in the blank. And you don't want to miss coming up in weather, we're going to talk about fill in the blank. Or in sports, we're going to see how the whatever team did today, right? So that's where open loops happen. We want the audience to come back. So we create an open loop. We create a tease. We create a reason for them to engage again. So this can work really well in your storytelling. You want to have open loops that are going to draw them along the process, whether that's inside of your emails, inside of your podcast, inside of your videos, or inside of your website. You want them to have an open loop that leads them to the next line. And then eventually you want to start closing off these loops. So if we were to tease something in a news segment or on a television show, or in your marketing materials, or in your content online on your website, for example, you could say, in the next video, we're going to talk about A, B, C, and D. So they're going to remember, oh, we're going to talk about A, B, C, and D. So we just finished talking about A, now we're going to talk about B. See how when we wrap up A, that closes the loop and it leads to the next phase. It chains together. It says now that we finish that, the next level is going to build off of what we just learned. The other way I like to think about this is with a spiral staircase. If you think about a spiral staircase, if you looked at it straight up and down, it would just look like a whole bunch of circles. It would just look like one concentric circle. But if you look at it as a spiral, you're slowly moving up. And each time you come to the finish line of that next one, you start on the next level. So I like to think about this as a chain. What it's doing is it's drawing us, it's closing off one process and leading us to the next phase of that process. So we want to think about this as we move forward with any marketing pieces, with any video pieces. We want to close the loop on one end and open a new loop. So I like to think about this with call to actions. We finish one thing and we say, this is the next step. This is the next thing that you could do with me. This is the next phase of the process that you could work with. So for example, I like to just limit this to 2 options. So I had a couple of clients, I was working with 3 different clients recently, and I sent them their video projects and we were basically getting ready to be finished, but there were a few things that needed to happen still. And so instead of telling them all the things that needed to happen or that could happen, you could market it. You could have me make a social media post. You could have me do this. You could have me do that. I just limited it to 2 things. I want them to either choose this or that. I don't want them to have all the options because that's where we start getting confused. When we're brainstorming, when we're trying to find all the options, that's not a problem. We like to give them lots and lots of options, especially when we're thinking about our feelings, offering us options. We want to have a plethora of options. But then once we get to a certain point, we want to limit it down to 1 or 2. Especially when it comes to buying or when it comes to purchasing, moving forward in the program, moving forward with working with us, we want it to be limited to 1 or 2 options. You can either do this or do that. The more options they have, the more confused they are. And as I've been taught several different times, especially when it comes to video, a confused purchaser never buys. Somebody who is confused, they're not going to, quote, buy. Whether that's buying into the next phase of the program, whether that's doing the next thing that you want them to accomplish, or whether that's actually paying you money and buying from you. A confused purchaser never buys. So we want it to be very simple. We want them to choose. Am I going to close this loop or am I going to close this loop? And it makes it very simple for them. So a few years ago, they did some studies. They were looking at different grocery stores. And Target actually kind of looked at this and said, okay, what do we want to do? Do we want to be like Walmart where we have all these options? Or do we want to have a strategic section, a strategic layer of options? And so they started limiting down. They started saying, you know what? Instead of selling 5 different types of pickles, 10 different types of pickles, 27 different types of pickles, we're going to limit it down to 5. We're going to limit it down to 3. We're going to limit it down to 2. One place that's really famous for this is In-N-Out Burger. They really want to limit down their menu. So they have a few options. You can get a burger, you can get fries, you can get a shake, but they're not going to say, do you want to have chicken tenders? Do you want to have an enchilada? Do you want tacos? Do you want burritos? They've limited it down because they want you to go in and out. They want you to move very quickly through their process. It simplifies their process. It makes it so that you can close that loop very quickly and move on to the next phase of your day. When we want to think about having an open loop, we want them to have lots of options. We want them to feel like there's so many ways that this could go. So I like to think about the Choose Your Own Adventure books. When you were reading a Choose Your Own Adventure book, they gave you a couple of options. And sometimes it felt like there were so many options. But then once you got down to it, it really limited it down to just a couple of choices. Think about the times when you've been confused as a buyer, when you've thought, I'm not quite sure. What do I do? Do I do this? Do I do this? Do I do this? Do I do this? And suddenly you get so many options that you're like, no, that just feels overwhelming. I like to choose things and then move forward with my choice. That's me closing loops. And I like to do that in a way that is going to help me move forward and help my clients to move forward. So when you're thinking about having open loops and building with stories, you want to build an open loop that spurs them to the next thought and close that loop. Open loop that spurs them to the next section and then close that loop. So as we think about these processes, think about the things that are in your life that are open loops and that are closed loops. How could you close off more of your loops so that way you can get the things that you want in your life? And where do you need more open loops? Where do you need more possibilities? Where is it serving you to have open loops? So, if you want more help with this, and especially with your storytelling and video work, you can join me inside of Lights, Camera, Action, where we turn on all the lights in your brain, focus the camera of your mind, and then take action to get you to where you want to go.